Hello. I'm honored to be here. It's been a long time. I spoke here about 32 years ago. In the meantime, I've been all over the world teaching. So thank you for inviting me back to my home state. Here we go. My disclosure is I'm the founder and CEO of Soul Supports Incorporated, and Soul Supports supports me. We started this company based on this core value. We make people better. And we walk the talk, if you ever deal with us. Before I get into my lecture, I just want to briefly mention, we've spent the last 2 years working on this technique called relax, release, relief. If you guys want to learn it, it's a technique that you push on 15 points on the foot very lightly, as light as you push on your own eye. And for some unknown reason, all foot pain disappears. Even CRPS goes away permanently. It takes 8 minutes to do. It's done with the end of a pen. It's an amazing technique. If you want to learn it, it's all of $5 to learn. And this is the website, rrrtv.net. So this is an amazing development. It works on fresh fractures, healing fractures, restless leg syndrome. I think we've treated at least dozens and dozens of patients with fibro and CRPS, and with insane results. But that's not what I came to speak about. I want to talk about foot posture biomechanics. About 95% of all people, to greater or lesser degree, are pronators, overpronators, depending on where you draw the line. Why do so many people pronate? They could have genetic ligamentous laxity, the hard, flat, unvaried terrain we walk on, sedentary lifestyles. Tight gastroc soleus can pull up on the back of the calcaneus and cause it to roll forward and collapse. By the way, in RRR TV, there's a technique that will increase the range of motion of the gastroc, sometimes 15 to 25 degrees permanently without surgery. Don't cut any more gastrocs. Trauma. How hard do you push on that brake pedal just before impact? But the real reason I think people pronate so much is embryology. If you look at the embryologic development of the human foot, the caudal embryo has the limb buds emerge at 4 to 6 weeks. They come out in the frontal plane. They begin to rotate toward the mid-sagittal plane. At 26 weeks, you're plantar to plantar. But then they begin to rotate down toward the transverse plane. At birth, you're at about 45 to 55 degrees inverted. Luckily, we don't walk at birth. We have 9 to 15 months before we take a single step. At 3.5, you're at 90% of adult position. At 5.5, it's over. The vast majority of people never make it to the ground. So they're left with an inverted foot, and that's what Root was measuring when he lied you down on your stomach and bisected your leg and heel. He was measuring an underdevelopment of the human foot. Little history on biomechanics. Started with Royal Whitman, circa 1890. Prior to Root, he published an article on weak foot. I love the title, A Study of the Weak Foot with Reference to its Causes, Diagnosis, and Cure, with an analysis of 1,000 cases of so-called flat foot. What he's saying is that a weak foot is not a flat foot. And he's absolutely right. You can have a low arch that never drops any further, and it's quite functional. You can have a high arch that drops a lot, enough to weaken the foot, weaken its structure, and that's the foot that's going to give you trouble. He writes in his article, the object of treatment is to change the weak foot not only in contour, but in habitual attitudes, that's posture, and empower a voluntary motion to those of the normal foot, because a cure is impossible until function is regained. 1896, he said that. This man was so far ahead of his time. Why didn't his orthotic gain favor? The reason is it was made of stainless steel. He made his orthotic out of 16 and 18 gauge stainless. When you go that high in the arch and you're so rigid, it's intolerable. So it fell out of favor. Merton Root came along in the 50s, 60s, and finally published his book in 1977, Normal and Abnormal Function of the Foot. And he came out with what we're all taught in school, the neutral position theory of the foot. You notice it's a position. What does a position mean? It's a point of rotation around a singular axis. So he used the axis of Fick, 1904. Manter confirmed it in 41, Hicks in 50, and Root in 54. It's the axis that goes from dorsal anterior medial to plantar posterior lateral. So we actually, neutral position is somewhere in the range of motion of that singular axis. Then he taught us how to slipper cast, hang the foot out in space with no frame of reference and wrap plaster around it. Then we palpated. Where did we palpate? Not at the subtalar joint. We palpate the talonavicular joint. It's the wrong joint. You can fuse the talonavicular and still have some motion in the subtalar joint. So we have the wrong, while we palpate the wrong joint, we are taught to push up on the fourth and fifth. What is that? Dorsiflexion, eversion, external rotation, which is the definition of pronation. So we're taking the foot out in space with no frame of reference, holding the wrong joint and pronating it to get our cast. The trouble is, how accurately can anyone even palpate neutral? Well, it's been researched. Mike Piernowski did a study showing that experienced foot care practitioners can get within plus or minus 3 degrees. Do you know how much the subtalar joint moves? 6 degrees. Plus 2 to minus 4. This is Root's graph. Plus 2 to minus 4. Plus or minus 3, you could find anywhere within the range of motion of the subtalar joint, and by palpation, you'll call it neutral. In fact, this is the 6 degrees. If I took a talus and put it on a calcaneus and moved it around the subtalar axis, I'd like to present you with the motion around which podiatric biomechanics is based. Are you underwhelmed? Does that look like collapse of the arch to anyone? It's not. In fact, if you were going to choose any axis, the subtalar would be the absolute worst. And I'll show you why. How accurately can you cast the foot? It's been studied. 10 brand new students, 10 experienced doctors, and the guru of casting at La Trobe University. They all cast the same foot. The guru cast it 10 times. All 3 groups had the same variation in forefoot to rear foot frontal plane angle. And you know what? Each group had 10 to 12 degrees of variation, and between groups, 16 and a half. I ran into Craig Payne at a conference. I said, whose foot did you use? He said, mine. I said, let me see it. I grabbed his foot. He only has 16 and a half degrees of motion, and they found it all. If they used somebody who could actually move, the results would be horrific. So Root taught us to lie on your stomach, bisect the heels and leg, and he gave us rear foot varus, forefoot varus, rear foot valgus, forefoot metaductus. And he taught us to take 17 measurements in the static biomechanical exam. But this study by Kirby and Phillips, 2 big Root fans actually, Kirby and Phillips showed that of the 17 measurements we're taught to take, 15 have an inter-rater reliability of 0.5. You say varus, and he says valgus. That's how bad it is. The remaining 2, one of which is relaxed calcaneal stance, is 0.6, which is still clinically meaningless. Neutral is someplace in the middle, from fully supinated to fully pronated. So the lab never knows what mood you were in that day. Why is this angle, by the way, so important? The angle, it's the major determinant of arch height. It's what determines the posture of the foot. And it was left out. So labs fill in the arches. Root never said to do that, but they had to because they had so many warranties, because there was a wide range of cast. No matter how good you think you are, you're off at least 10 to 12 degrees. So you end up with an orthotic that's even lower than the pronated cast you took. So you end up allowing the foot to collapse its posture almost completely before it even contacts the orthotic. What good is that? It's ridiculous. How did the orthotic supposed to work? How is it supposed to work? Is the rear foot post, right? Because Root said, bring the ground up to the foot. Well, I'm sorry, rear foot posting is a fantasy. That's a ridiculous concept. Why? You're taking a round object and you're putting it in a round cup. Where does it go? Wherever it wants. It's free to move. Every step can be different. Besides, do you ever grab the skin on the bottom of somebody's heel and move it medial and lateral? We did to 50 people and measured it. The skin moves 7 to 10 degrees in each direction. So when you put a 4-degree post, you might as well figure it's plus or minus 7 to 10 degrees. The error dwarfs your correction. And then you were off 10 to 12 in your cast. It's crazy. The third reason why rear foot posting is an absurdity is Newtonian physics. F equals ma. What does that mean? Force is mass times acceleration, and acceleration is a change in velocity in a unit of time. So what you're really saying, F equals m times change in velocity divided by time, but velocity is distance over time, miles per hour. So the real formula is F equals m times change in position over the square of time. Force is inversely proportional to the square of time. Let me translate that to English. If you want to do some work and you have a small force, it takes a long time. If you have a large force, it takes a little time. You could dig the Grand Canyon with the gentle force of the Colorado River over 10 million years. You could also dig this canyon in a matter of minutes with an earthquake. More force, less time. How much time do you have from heel strike to full pronation at 3 miles an hour? We measured it. 0.07 seconds. If I tell you something, it's because I measured it. It's funny, when I speak at Vanderbilt University Biomedical Engineering Department, and I tell them a 4-degree tilt is supposed to control the foot, they fall off their chairs laughing. Doctors believe what? There's not enough time. What are you going to do, an orthotic that creates time? Well, actually, you can do something like that. Let's take a look at the flexible flat foot. You'll all agree this is a flexible flat foot. Now, if we made a wedge that's 10 degrees, we would expect it to change the calcaneal eversion, right? Nope. Identical. In fact, Craig Payne told me he did a study where he used different size wedges, and in 50% of cases, calcaneal eversion increased from a medial wedge. Why would you think? Do you stick a nail through it? Why would you think it would go this way, but in fact, it could easily slide the other way? Rear foot posting is absolutely silly. So here's a 6-degree post incorporated into a standard Russian neutral position orthosis, and you'll see what change it made in calcaneal eversion. Do you see any change? There is none. I could show you 40 studies now showing that the standard orthotics we were taught to do in school make no kinematic change in the way you walk. But what if we raise the longitudinal arch? Put them into what I'm going to show you is mass posture. Now we have achieved what Root was trying to achieve, what he defined. I couldn't have done anything without Root. He defined my goals for me. He told me what the criteria for normalcy were, and we achieved them. Here's a Russian orthosis on the same foot and a mass posture orthosis. Can you see the difference? What is then the subtalar joint? The subtalar joint is a window latch. You know, when the two windows become even, the latch comes over and locks the window. Here's what happens with the subtalar joint. You hit the ground. Friction stops the calcaneus. The talus slides forward and begins to tilt. The talar head falls off the tilted anterior facet, unlocking the foot. Now you're at mid-stance and the body weight is pushing down and you have an incredibly steep hill to climb. You can't do it. What if, let's take a look at what happens. So what is the purpose of the subtalar joint? It slides you back, putting the head of the talus onto the anterior facet, blocking sagittal plane motion between these two bones. So when you pull on the gastroc, you have to propel around the ankle. So if you want your patient to be faster, have more endurance, give them an efficient gait by changing the posture of the foot and moving the head of the talus onto the anterior facet, because with this you can only rotate at the ankle. So Root was right about the locking mechanism. So I decided, Root made a few errors, and I decided to correct them. Most of his work was brilliant. I couldn't have done what I did without him. So let's take a fresh look at biomechanics. And I decided, instead of looking at the foot's rotation around a singular axis, and why did I say that's the worst axis? It's very interesting. The axis enters the foot at the talar neck, exits here. Now if you have an axis of motion, and you put a force on one side, you rotate. If you go the other side, you go the other way. What happens when the force goes directly through the axis? Nothing. Well, let's take a look. The axis exits plantar posterior lateral. Where do you heel strike? Plantar posterior lateral. The ground reaction force passes directly through the subtalar axis, and what's worse, the momentum down the leg bisects the dome of the talus, and the axis passes right through it. So the two major forces, besides friction, that pass through the foot at heel strike pass directly through the subtalar axis. Whoever designed this foot placed the subtalar axis in an orientation that would not be affected by the forces entering the foot at heel strike. That's why the subtalar axis is the worst axis to choose if you're choosing one. But posture is different. Posture is standing back and looking at all of the bones, looking at the symphony of motion that we call elevation of the arch and collapse of the arch. Root was right. The foot changes its function. When you elevate it, all the bones nest into each other. The ligaments tighten up to the end of their range of motion, and it becomes a rigid lever for propulsion. When your arch drops, it unlocks. It becomes floppy to adjust to the terrain. Posture is an all-axis theory. The foot has 26 bones, 35 joints. They wouldn't be there if they weren't participating in the gait cycle. So why would we choose the worst axis and based all biomechanics on it? It makes absolutely no sense. This is the motion we're trying to control, and this is a postural change, not a change, a rotation around just one axis. The subtalar certainly rotates. But what's interesting, studies show it only rotates when the foot is supinated. When the foot collapses, in fact, from 25 to 90% of the stance phase of gait, there is no rotation in the subtalar axis in any plane. It's interesting that the foot actually controls much of the body. This is the dance you do when you collapse on one side. You notice the shorter leg, when you collapse, the shoulder goes up. That was discovered in the late 1400s by Leonardo da Vinci, and to this day, it's an art term called contrapposto. Here it is from the side. So I'd like to introduce you to the mass posture theory of foot biomechanics. Mass stands for the maximal arch that a person can accept at mid-stance comfortably, that gives them adequate supination to stabilize the talus against the calcaneus. As I said, when you put the talar head on the anterior facet, there is no sagittal plane motion possible. When it falls off, you can get sagittal plane motion. The maximum arch with the heel and forefoot on the ground. In other words, instead of allowing the pathologic motion to occur and hitting the orthotic after it's happened, why don't we start at the beginning? Why don't we start before the pathologic motion occurs? So let me simplify the foot orthotic. A foot orthotic has no gears. It has no electronics. You know what it is? A foot orthotic is a leaf spring. That's all it is. Look at a leaf spring and look at a foot orthotic. They're the same thing. So why didn't everybody start at the beginning? Because when they tried, it hurt. For two reasons. Number one, they raised it halfway. If you raise it halfway, it repetitively impacts 3,500 times a day, and it becomes intolerable, and the patient throws it back at you. So they made them very flat. The other reason is they couldn't answer this question: should a foot orthotic be rigid or flexible? The answer is yes, because the question is completely misstated. The right question is, if I take a curved piece of some material, place it on a flat surface, how much vertical force should this material exert on the human body? You don't have to answer that question because Isaac Newton already did. Isaac Newton said, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. You want me to tell you how much force an orthotic should apply? How about you tell me how much force you're going to apply? What causes the downward force of the human body? Extensive research shows it's caused by Dunkin' Donuts. It's what we weigh. That's the first factor. Weigh your patient, because they'll tell you what they want to weigh. The second factor is how flexible are you? If you hardly can move your foot, the orthotic doesn't have to apply so much corrective force. But if you are extremely flexible, the foot orthotic has to apply a far greater corrective force. So the second factor is foot flexibility. The third factor is momentum, mass times velocity. If I put a force plate down and I walk over it, I'll get one reading. If I run over it, I'll get another reading. So instead of looking at an individual step, we look at the average force applied during ADL, activities of daily living. And if they have a second activity, like you're a runner or a lineman for the Broncos, let's say you choose to work out till you can leg press 1,500 pounds, and decide to line up with another guy who could do that and accelerate into each other. It's a good idea. You're going to be giving a tremendous amount of force, and you'll need an orthotic calibrated to a higher number. And we do that. So this is the science of treating the collapse of the posture of the foot before it collapses. So how did we determine how much force? We invented a device. It took me 9 years. This is a device where we blow up a bladder inside of an enclosed container, bleed off a pressure transducer, put a digital encoder underneath, and every 2,000ths of an inch we measure the force per unit area necessary to move the orthotic. That's an Excel file you can graph. The slope of that graph is the resistance to compression in the orthotic. We used to do it this way, but this was inaccurate because it's a single point of calibration. It could be curving before or after this point. So now we do it this way, optically. We take a high-speed camera, shoot it up at the same enclosed container. Instead of a bladder that you can't see through, you end up with a bladder that's clear, shine green LEDs. You can see them leaking out the side. Green LEDs, and get a shadow. And LabVIEW National Instruments allows us to accurately measure and calibrate every single orthotic left to right. Well, about 2 years ago, I had the distinct honor to speak at the North Carolina Podiatric Medical, and who was in the audience but the podiatrist from Fort Bragg. When I was done, they asked me to treat one of their residents, a 3-year resident that was taking, she was a triathlete, and she was taking about 6 ibuprofen, 1,200 milligrams a day for 11 years for her pain. I said, I can get rid of your pain in 10 days. She said, no, you can't. So I cast her. I sent her a pair to run in, a pair to live in, and a pair to bicycle in. Not only did her times improve, but in 10 days she was pain-free. So they called me up and said, can you come and lecture at Bragg? And while you're here, can you treat the 5 worst cases of foot pain in the U.S. Special Forces? I said, your 5 worst are probably so broken, they're unfixable. Give me 25. So they did. I said, I'll donate the orthotics. Well, first guy comes in, he's had the kind of pain for 15 years that you wouldn't even stand. And yet he starts every day with an 80-pound pack, a 12-mile march, then a full day of the most intensive physical training you could imagine. This was a challenge. I gave everybody 2 pairs. One calibrated to their body weight and uniform, one calibrated to their body weight, uniform, and pack. They called me up 3 weeks later and said, every one of them is extremely satisfied. They're no longer being med-boarded out of the service. Every one of them is back to active duty, and these guys cost $1 million a piece. They were very happy. They gave me an exclusive at Bragg. Then Lejeune, Lemoore, Madigan, Bremerton, Langland, Lackley, Quantico, Fort Hood, Fort Sam Houston, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Okinawa, Tripler, Schofield. I can keep going on and on. I've become a military-industrial complex. But they gave me a problem. They said, when we said 80-pound pack, it's not always 80 pounds. When they put on full body armor and a gun and a helmet and night vision gear and the bigger pack, they're getting plantar fasciitis again. I said, well, of course. I calibrated it to 80 pounds. And they said, well, loading demands vary. Well, I knew they varied due to this. This is interesting. It's a double-edged sword. Not only is the woman gaining weight, but third trimester, she's putting out a hormone, relaxin, to relax ligaments, to open the birth canal, and the foot is even more flexible and therefore needs more support. And then they said, you know, there are days we don't carry a pack. There are days we carry a 40-pound pack. Then there are days like these, where we carry the full pack. And then there are days like this. That thing on top of his pack is a 50-pound steel mortar base, and he's not only carrying the base, but he's carrying all of the rounds for that mortar. This destroys the lower back of some soldiers, and for the women, it actually fractures their pelvis. That's how bad it is. Then there are days like this, where you have to carry another soldier. So we went back to the drawing board, and actually with the help of somebody that's in this room that invented this, we invented what we call the leaf. After all, it's a leaf spring, and we patented it. The leaf is an additional piece of plastic you could add to the bottom of the orthotic, and this smaller one is, we call it the pregnant orthotic. It's for 30 pounds, plus or minus 10 or so. The next one is 50 pounds, plus or minus 20. And the next one is 100 pounds, plus or minus 30. So we have 3 leaves that they can hot swap depending on what they're going to do that day. This is treating collapse of the longitudinal arch before it happens. That's mass posture. So the old way was let the foot drop to near the end of its range of motion and then hit the orthotic. Why did it work when it did? Because at the end of the range of motion, you begin to compress your own soft tissues in the arch. And the impact of pronation itself is dampened. And it's at the end of the range of motion that we see the ligaments pulled tightly. That's where the tissue stresses are. What is a symptom? It's when micro-trauma occurs faster than your ability to heal. And this took you from just above the threshold to just under it, without making any significant kinematic change in the gait cycle. So you're using the orthotic like the bumper on your car. If you're going low velocity, you hit another car, you absorb the shock, no damage. But if you're going faster, you cause damage, like putting on a big pack. And if you're going faster, you cause even more damage, like running up a hill on a big pack, with a big pack on. We decided to use this spring in a different way. Instead of waiting until the pathologic motion is done, we started at the beginning. There were 2 reasons I was able to get away with this. One is there is no impact. Normally, you would drop down and hit the orthotic with every step. But here, you don't have to drop down. You're already touching it. 0 impact is very important. The other one is the force per unit area is evenly distributed along the bottom of the foot. When I was in school, they invented full contact plaster casting for diabetic ulcers. I said, how can you put rigid plaster against the delicate skin of a diabetic? They said, no hot spots. That's the answer. When you're in full contact, the force per unit area is evenly distributed, and actually you take the weight off the areas that would ulcerate. So it's wonderful for diabetics. We chose mid-stance in our casting because mid-stance is when the greatest downward force is on the foot. We wanted to capture it at straight ahead gait mid-stance. So we invented a casting technique that passes weight through the foot in as close to an ideal gait cycle as each individual patient can tolerate with their anatomy. But then we went further. Because if you're standing on an orthotic, your soft tissues will be compressed. They won't be compressed evenly. Some areas go in 2 millimeters, some go in 7 to 9 millimeters. So we decided to use a calibrated urethane foam. So the foam is calibrated to compress the soft tissues with every step. Then we angulated the foam at 27 degrees so that everyone would be in the same degree of supination, of inversion, before you started pushing their feet in the foam. There are two kinds of orthotics, accommodative and functional. When I was in school, accommodative meant soft and cushy. Functional meant rigid with a post. That's not what it means. Accommodative means a redistribution of force per unit area, an even distribution. This is simultaneously the most accommodative and the most functional because it changes posture and distributes force evenly on the plantar surface. So at the highest point, accommodative and functional are the same thing. So the old theory was the arch is dropped. What are we going to do for it? We're going to tilt the ground 4 degrees. I'm sorry, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. That doesn't work, I told you, because round object in a round cup, the soft tissue interpositioning slides more than the post, and F equals MA. The new theory, mass posture theory, is the arch is dropped. Raise it back up. Put it back in its functional posture. The only trouble we had with our orthotic is it took a long time to break in. But now, with relax, release, relief, you can push on 14 points or 15 points on the foot over about a 4 to 8 minute period. It takes very quick. And it erases the pattern of firing of the muscles in the foot. Why do people hurt when they first put on an orthotic like this? Because as body weight comes over a flat foot, they fire the intrinsics to try to raise their arch. When you put a big piece of plastic in there, they're pushing against the plastic. It hurts. But when you do this technique, the foot relaxes and erases its firing order. And the first step they take in the orthotic, they reprogram and they instantly adapt to the orthotic. Now it has this interesting side effect. 2 interesting side effects. Number 1, when you do it, all pain disappears. So a great time to do it is at dispensing, before they take their first step after being released. They stand up in the orthotic and go, oh my gosh, I'm pain-free. It's amazing. So relax, release, relief. We depend on relax, release, relief to get people used to the orthotic. But we also found relax, release, relief depends on a high arched orthotic. Because how long does it really last? Until you re-injure and have a new painful problem. So what happens? Let's say you have plantar fasciitis. I can get rid of all the pain of plantar fasciitis in 4 to 8 minutes. But as soon as they stand up, they stretch the fascia again. And they tear it again. And the pain begins all over again. If we hold the arch up, there's no pain. It doesn't come back. It's absolutely amazing. So this is the same patient's orthotics done in mass posture versus the neutral position theory of Martin Root. I am a huge fan of Mert Root, don't get me wrong. Without him, I couldn't have done anything. But with his work, I was able to change the way biomechanics is practiced. And in 1999, a study at Georgia State University compared us to every orthotic on the market. They'd already tested everything, so we went head to head with the best. We beat mechanically the best orthotic ever tested by 61% mechanically. This is a quantum leap in therapy, in orthotic therapy. This takes orthotics to an entirely new level, not just in height of the arch, but in effectiveness. So most custom orthotics, the ones we were taught to do in school, are absolutely equal to prefabs. Don't believe me? Maybe you believe the Pfeffer study, Journal of Foot and Ankle, April '99. They looked at 238 patients in 15 centers across the United States. Cheap prefabs beat custom-made orthotics, neutral position custom-made orthotics made by a podiatrist. Then it was repeated in our journal. What did they find? No statistically significant difference between custom-made and prefab. So our orthotics, what I was taught in school, are no better than foot levelers, Dr. Scholl's, or the Good Feet store. They work by the same mechanism, compressing your soft tissues, dampening impact at the end of pronation. But don't believe that. The highest level of evidence-based medicine is the meta-analysis. There have been 3 so far, and all 3 agree. Customs made in the neutral position are no better than Dr. Scholl's, than foot levelers, than the Good Feet. They work by the same mechanism, dampening impact at the end of the collapse of the posture. Masking symptoms is just unacceptable. The trouble is, as I said, the measurements we take are meaningless. Why? Because Royal Whitman was right. We're measuring in the wrong direction. We always said flat foot because the ground is flat. We'll compare it to the ground. When in actuality, I don't care how close you are to the ground. I care how much did you drop from your ideal posture down. Did you drop enough to unlock the foot and create the deformities that we see? That's what I want to know. Tom McPoyle then took the 17 measurements and compared them to a 10-camera motion analysis. You know what he found? No correlation. No correlations. So it's not just, they're not just inaccurate, they're not effective. They don't change the gait cycle. X-rays, what do we measure in X-ray? Full weight bearing. You're looking at the worst posture. When you stand up in that foot leveler's cast, your foot drops to the end of its range of motion. It's the worst. What does that tell you about the height of the corrected longitudinal arch? Absolutely nothing. When you step on a pressure plate, what does it tell you? You're on the fully collapsed arch. It tells you nothing. 0. I don't need to know how bad it can get. I need to know the shape of a plastic leaf spring that I can calibrate to that individual patient. So this is a postural change that we're seeing, not a rotation around this one axis. So what we did was we started looking for how can we measure this change? How can we tell who will benefit and who will not benefit and how much? We looked through the literature, we found this thing called the LA angle. If you put a dot on the medial malleolus, the medial prominence of the navicular, and the medial center of the head of the first metatarsal, you have the LA angle. This angle was first described by Bob Donatelli in Biomechanics of the Foot and Ankle. He described it as big X's there, so when you're doing gait analysis, you can see the change in that angle. Well, then the Navy midshipmen, they did a study on it, and they found that it had an intrarater of 0.9 and interrater of 0.81. This is a significant test. Then I read Tom McPoyle's work on it, and he said walking and standing correlated 90%. Walking and running, he found, correlated 85%. Then I found this group that studied it, and they said, the LA angle has been shown to be a good static measure of dynamic foot function and can be reliably implemented in a normal clinical environment to evaluate and assess the efficacy of prescribed foot orthoses. That's gold. That's gold. So what did we do with that information? We made an app. If you have an iPhone, you could download this app from the App Store. LA Angle. First, we were going to charge individually, but we decided, just make it a subscription so that a person can do as many of these as they want for $4.99 a month. Why is this important? You could look at, this doesn't look at just the worst posture, it looks at the best posture and the difference between them, telling you how much this person will benefit from a foot orthotic. So it looks like this when you're doing it. You see a live reading of the angle, and we added this extra dot so we could see how much the heel was off the ground. First, you slide this up and down in masking till you only see the green dots. Then you hit capture, cap, and this is what it looks like. Sliding it up and down, go to capture, there's the angle. Capture it flat-footed, then step back and lift the heel. You can set it for 25, 30, 35, or 45 degrees. You have the flat, the angle at toe off, and the difference. What we're now studying is, does the difference in this LA angle correlate to deformity? If it does, and I believe it will, we have the very first test that will predict who will get bunions, hammer toes, who will get the foot deformities that we treat, and how much we can change the posture of the foot and the function therefore of the foot. The LA Angle app is available at www.laangle.com, but you can get it from the App Store. In fact, we'll just direct you to the App Store. I want to end with Ehlers-Danlos disease. I had the distinct honor in 2016 of being selected as one of the top biomechanists to debate at the World Congress of Podiatry in Montreal. I won that debate, and then the next month, the American College of Foot and Ankle Orthopedic Medicine, ACFOM, invited me to debate two of the former professors of biomechanics, Darrell Phillips and Eric Fuller, and I won that debate. How did I win? Ehlers-Danlos. Everyone always asks me, what about the weird motorcycle accident that's rigid and varus? Certainly I would bring the ground up for that. But I'm asking you, what about the opposite? What about the patient that is a puddle on the floor? In this particular case, you choose the posture. Whatever you put in their shoe, they'll mold to it. That will become their posture. So it's your choice what posture you want to start your correction in. So answer me this. Would you choose a completely collapsed posture, like foot levelers? Would you choose one that's a third supinated, which is about what most neutral position orthotics are? Would you choose one that's 2/3 supinated? Or would you start at the beginning? What would be your choice? And if you would do it for an Ehlers-Danlos patient, explain to me why you wouldn't do it for every patient. I just published a study in the Foot and Ankle Online Journal. We took a 27-year veteran who had 12 years diabetes, 9 years neuropathy, 7 years profoundly numb, developing a Charcot foot on the right. He'd already been treated for 4 months by the VA, who took him from a nice arch to a rocker sole in 4 months, just by putting serial casting on. That's the express lane to amputation, as you well know. I said it's breaking and healing at the same time. Why don't we start changing the posture? And I made a mass posture EVA orthotic. I got my thumbs in that arch, and I pushed it as hard as I could. I got Rice Krispies going off. I didn't care, it's breaking and healing at the same time. I slowly, over a 4-month period, changed that higher and higher. I changed them from a rocker sole to a small arch. Then something happened that blew my mind. he called me up and said, on the left foot that you raised all the way, it's not Charcot, full feeling has returned after 7 years of numbness. On the right foot, 60% of the feeling returned. So I published the case in Foot and Ankle Online Journal. So before I end, any questions? This is a new technology. Go ahead.
Okay, what effect does that have on a surgery?
Well,
Based on angles.
your surgery treats the symptom. The disease is the way they function. Why did they develop a bunion? Because they came over an unlocked foot. So if you want your bunions to recur, don't raise the arch. But if you raise the arch, not only will the first metatarsal come down and in, but what they measured at Georgia State was something that Root said, 60% of the force of toe up should be under the first metatarsal. This transferred 61% more force to the first metatarsal. So what did that mean? It not only came to the ground on its axis, reversing the bunion, but at the same time it increased its purchase. So that's a good question. If you have hallux limitus, then a rocker sole shoe is wonderful. But it's interesting, the reason I get to speak at the IFAF is because 18 years ago, Doc Dockery invited me to speak. And I look at the program, I said, these are the people I studied in school. What am I doing on this podium? He said, my feet are killing me. He had everything. He had Morton's neuroma, metatarsalgia, plantar fasciitis, hammer digit, lesion subsecond. And I said, I made him a deal when I casted him. I said, if I fix all of your problems, can I speak at all your conferences? The last 18 years, I've gone all over the world. It's been a pleasure. His hallux limitus returned to full motion. It's not supposed to happen. His hammer toe is now completely straight. The lesion under his second looks like baby's butt, as he describes it. Every one of his symptoms reversed. And in fact, form follows function. What does that mean? If you walk around like this, you'll become like this. It doesn't only follow it in the direction of disease, deformity, injury, and disability. It follows it in the direction of health. When you change the way a person functions, and you're in charge of the most important structure biomechanically in the human body, the interface with the world. If you fail to change that interface by changing the posture of the foot, that is a tremendous sin of omission. When you change that posture, you not only affect the foot, you affect the knee. The foot internally rotates. The knee increases its Q angle. The quads pull laterally. The patella rides up the lateral side of the groove and shears the medial. The ACL wraps around the PCL to the end where it rips. The pelvis is forced to tilt forward, causing SI pain, where you splint your paravertebral muscles, desiccate the discs, increase facet arthritis, and narrow the dorsal foramina, which are all sensory.
I got a little nutty around the longitudinal axis angle. So how do you use that again? Is that useful in making a diagnosis, or is that useful in prescribing treatment?
Let me tell you, I don't know how it is today, but when I was in practice, it was all about documentation. So what I do is, I capture the foot in its best and worst posture. So if they came to me and said, why did you give this person an orthotic? I'd say, because their LA angle was this, and I could get this. Then when the orthotic is dispensed, you rest their foot on it and do it again. You said, I did get that. I achieved my goal. You want to know why I did an orthotic? I can show you a measurement that changed. That's why I did an orthotic. Do that with a Russian orthotic. Do the LA angle standing on a neutral position orthotic, and you will see no change in LA angle. When you do this, now you can explain to the patient, you need an orthotic and you don't.
So the LA angle when it's off is the desirable.
Because that's the closest we found to mass posture is about 40 degrees of heel elevation, which is fully supinated in most cases. So it tells you who you can help, who you can't help, how much they're going to benefit. There are people like say, you know, it's going to help a little bit. It's up to you whether you want it. Then there's people that I say, I'm going to land a helicopter in your parking lot and run out with the orthotics in a cooler. You need them that bad. There are people that really need postural change, and it affects the entire body. Good posture at the feet allows good posture in the rest of the body. And that ties in with the relax, release, relief, because now you can give them back the range of motion in their body to assume a good functional posture all the way up. For chiropractors, they go, I do an adjustment, it's beautiful on the table, but then they stand up, it pulls out. So if they fight a tug of war with gravity, speak to them. Tell them you could change the biomechanics so they no longer fight gravity. They're not going to win that tug of war because they push a few times at 15 pounds of pressure, then you stand up and take 3,500 steps a day, and with the pressure of your own body weight, you're pulling it out. Who's going to win that tug of war? Gravity will win every time. But when you raise the arch, gravity is your friend. You actually, if you want to cast off weight bearing, then I suggest you limit your practice to astronauts in zero gravity. Because if you have gravity, you're going to collapse the arch over time. It's a tented structure experiencing intermittent downward compression. The only way it'll go is down, and the only way you got to push it is up. And in fact, if you ever make an adjustment on this orthotic, it will move up, not down. If they say it hurts, move it up. Why? It's hurting because it was too low and it's repetitively banging. Raise it up where it's in full contact and it won't. As long as you calibrate the leaf spring. Plenty of people have tried this and failed. Why? Because the warranties eat them alive. We were able to eliminate the warranties by calibration. That's the key. Any other question? Yes, sir.
How does it stop? How would your advice function for a runner and cycling?
Running and cycling?
Yeah, because we have no use for a runner. What else do we have?
Good question. I happen to have with me today a guy who's going to start working with me next month, a world-class runner who's won the J.P. Morgan race in New York 13 times, won his age group in the New York Marathon. Right before he got his orthotics, he was the running guru for Runner's World, Bud Coates. Bud, can you stand up, say hi? Bud's an incredible runner. He calls us up before the New York Marathon, says, first time in my life I trained for a marathon with no pain, no injury. He went on the next day to win his age group in the New York Marathon. Of the last 9 NCAA champions, 6, almost 7, when I say almost 7, I'm talking the last play of the Clemson-Alabama game, last 3 seconds, Clemson won. If it wasn't for that, I'd have 7 out of 9 NCAA champion teams, every single player wearing this. 3 world's strongest men, multiple Olympic medals wearing this technology. And as far as, we have whole hockey teams now. We have, as far as sports, this is unbelievable. But you have to tell us what position they play. You have to, so we can calibrate to that position. Is it exact? No, there's a range of forces we're looking for. We're looking for the average. The real limits of calibration, too hard, you can't stand it. Too soft, you pronate through it. There's a sweet spot in the middle. How often do we hit it? I can tell you my warranties. 99.2%. The trouble is, the last 0.8, 0.4 say it's too rigid and 0.4 too flexible. So what do you do then? You attribute it to the princess and the pea.
Wouldn't the LA will be higher than normal walk?
In what? Running? No. No, the LA angle is the same. The highest posture you can accept is the same. That's why. It's limited by your ranges of motion, which haven't changed. So we give you the highest posture. Any other questions? These are good questions. Sir?
If it's full contact, it should be useful for somebody that has a neuropathic ulcer.
I think so. Now, I always shied away from neuropathic ulcers. I don't like treating patients with orthotics that have PVD. So I'm afraid that the pressure of the orthotic could cause a problem. So I always shied away from it until I saw Michael Graham showing that he could reverse neuropathy with the Hyperocure implant. He wrote 3 articles on it. I said if he could do it with the implant, I could do it with an orthotic. And indeed, I have. So now I'm not so afraid, but please, not the PVD patient, because I don't want anyone to lose their leg. Yes, sir?
How are you calibrating a piece of plastic against the line of the foot?
Well, we take before we dispense it, we put it in an enclosed container, blow up a bladder, measure the pressure it takes to move it every 0.02 of an inch. That's the force curve of that plastic. We create a force curve on every single orthotic, left and right, and we calibrate it to deliver an equal and opposite range of forces. How can we do it? We've been in business now well over 25 years, and we have 25 years, millions of orthotics that we've calibrated. That's an incredible amount of data. That data tells us so much. Thicknesses, yes. We start out with 6 different thicknesses, then we extrapolate between the 0.5 millimeters. But calibration, how do you change the plastic? That's a bit of a manufacturing secret. But you'd be surprised where you have to remove the plastic. It's not from the arch.
2 questions. 1, is this being taught in schools today? And 2, how do you cast?
The way we
Tell me
cast,
about the angle of the flow did say.
the angle is 27 degrees inverted. We begin by elevating the arch even further, pushing the heel in. Then we push the met head in, 5th met head, right? No, it's not weight bearing, it's sitting. You want to control the motion. So you push the 5th met head in, then you release the windlass effect because the toes would have an abnormal effect. The foam would dorsiflex the toes and strap the plantar fascia and lower the arch. So we push the toes in to release the windlass effect. Then we push the metatarsals in at a 45-degree angle down and toward the heel, seating them all to the ground. Now you've got the highest arch a person could accept at mid-stance. Medicine has to move on. It's about time we started doing orthotics that actually worked. That's what I want to do. Because our theory, our core value is make people better. And we walk the talk. We live it, breathe it, and that's who we are. Good questions. Good questions. Anybody else? Am I over my time? Probably 5 minutes. Guys, thank you very, very much for having me. I appreciate it.